Chosen one, hear this carefully, because what is happening around you right now is not random. Your silence was not weakness, and it was not a sign that you had nothing left to say. It was not failure, it was not confusion, and it was not you disappearing because you lost your worth. Your silence became necessary the moment God began pulling you out of a cycle that had been feeding on your energy for too long. What they called distance was actually protection. What they called change was actually growth. What they called coldness was the beginning of discernment. The moment you became quiet, something shifted, not only in you, but around you. The same people who were comfortable when you kept explaining yourself started becoming uneasy. The same people who could ignore your value when you were always available suddenly began to feel pressure. The same people who were relaxed while you were overextending yourself became restless the second your spirit stopped chasing what your soul had been tired of carrying. And that is why they are rushing now. Chosen one, do not overlook this. They did not panic when you were hurting. They did not panic when you were overthinking. They did not panic when you were lying awake at night trying to make sense of mixed signals, delayed effort, emotional inconsistency, and half-hearted treatment. But now that you have gone quiet, now that your energy has pulled back, now that your spirit is no longer standing in the same place asking the same questions, suddenly there is movement. Suddenly there is urgency. Suddenly there are words, concern, explanations, and attempts to reach you. You need to understand why. Some people only feel your value when they can no longer control your availability. Some people only notice your absence when your silence stops feeding their comfort. Some people only begin to speak when they realize your heart is no longer sitting open in the same vulnerable position it once was. They are not always responding to love. Sometimes they are responding to loss. Sometimes they are responding to the fear that they no longer have the same access to you that they once took for granted. That is why heaven is warning you now. Do not confuse their reaction with transformation. Just because someone suddenly moves does not mean they have changed. Just because someone suddenly sounds soft does not mean they are healed. Just because someone suddenly reaches out does not mean God is sending them back with clean intentions. Sometimes what looks like concern is panic. Sometimes what sounds like urgency is control losing its grip. Sometimes what feels like an opening is only a last-minute attempt to stop you from walking fully into the peace God has been building in your life. Chosen one, your silence exposed something. It exposed who was only comfortable with you when you were accessible without limits. It exposed who benefited from your emotional labor while giving very little in return. It exposed who expected endless understanding from you while offering very little accountability themselves. It exposed who liked the old version of you because that version was easier to delay, easier to confuse, easier to return to without growth, and easier to keep nearby without ever truly honoring. But you changed, and you needed to. You did not become heartless. You became harder to manipulate. You did not become arrogant. You became less willing to betray your own peace just to keep others comfortable. You did not become distant for no reason. You became aware that too much of your energy had been going into places where it was not protected, not respected, and not reciprocated in truth. That is what triggered them. Your silence announced that access was changing. Your silence announced that your healing was becoming real. Your silence announced that you were no longer going to explain everything, chase every misunderstanding, or keep proving your heart to people who had already seen enough to know your value. Your silence announced that God was teaching you to let actions speak louder than excuses, and patterns speak louder than promises. So now they are rushing to speak, rushing to reconnect, rushing to sound sincere, rushing to remind you of history, rushing to make themselves present in your atmosphere again before the separation becomes permanent. But listen very carefully, chosen one. Their rush is not your instruction. You are not required to move just because they finally did. You are not required to reopen your heart just because someone felt your withdrawal. You are not required to abandon discernment because someone suddenly found the words they should have had when you were the one in pain. This is the trap many chosen ones fall into. They mistake sudden movement for divine confirmation. They assume that because someone has returned, that return must be holy. But not every return is restoration, and not every open door is from God. Sometimes old cycles come back dressed in softer language. Sometimes delayed people return with urgent energy, not because they are ready to honor you properly, but because they can feel you slipping beyond the reach they once had. They feel your shift. They feel your boundary. They feel your peace becoming stronger than your longing. They feel your spirit detaching from what your emotions once kept trying to revive. And this message is here to tell you one thing before you make any emotional move. Do not fall for this too quickly. Pray before you respond. Discern before you engage. Watch before you trust. Because what is happening right now is bigger than a conversation. It is a spiritual test of whether you will return to what God already started pulling you out of, or whether you will honor the silence He used to heal you. Chosen one, the reason your silence disturbed them so deeply is because your silence removed the version of you they had learned how to manage. As long as you were speaking, explaining, checking in, trying to keep peace, trying to save the connection, trying to make your intentions clear, they still felt they had some influence over the situation. They may not have respected your effort the way they should have, but they were comfortable with it because it kept you emotionally available. It kept you within reach. It kept you in a posture where you were still giving them chances they had not earned and understanding they had not fully valued. But silence changed that. The moment you became quiet, they lost their ability to predict you. They no longer knew whether you were still waiting, still hoping, still hurting, still willing to reopen the same door again. They could no longer measure how much emotional access they had. They could no longer rely on your softness to keep the connection alive while they remained inconsistent. Your silence took away the cushion. It removed the space where they had been comfortable benefiting from your patience without having to confront their own behavior in a serious way. This is why some people become uneasy when a chosen one goes quiet. It is not always because they suddenly developed deep understanding. It is often because silence forces truth to the surface. When there are no more long explanations, no more emotional paragraphs, no more overextended effort, no more attempts from you to hold everything together, then all that remains is the pattern itself. And patterns are difficult to hide when silence is involved. Chosen one, some people looked strong only because you were doing the emotional work for both sides. Some people looked unbothered only because you were carrying the burden of the connection in private. Some people looked calm only because your heart kept absorbing the tension, the confusion, the inconsistency, and the lack of clarity. But when you withdrew that energy, they were left alone with what they had created. They were left alone with the emptiness of their own effort. They were left alone with the truth they had avoided by leaning on your patience. That is why the atmosphere changed the moment you stopped talking. Your silence became a mirror. It reflected who cared when there was no immediate benefit. It reflected who was only comfortable while you stayed emotionally available. It reflected who truly valued your presence and who simply grew used to your accessibility. It reflected who respected your spirit and who only responded when they could feel you slipping away. This is why the reaction seems sudden. It is because silence has a way of exposing motives faster than confrontation ever could. There are people who can survive your tears because they are used to you recovering. There are people who can survive your pain because they assume you will still be there tomorrow. There are people who can survive your disappointment because they have learned that your loyalty usually keeps you from leaving completely. But what they struggle to survive is your real detachment. What they struggle to survive is when your peace becomes stronger than your emotional attachment. What they struggle to survive is when God teaches you how to stop feeding a pattern that has been draining you for too long. That is where the panic begins. Chosen one, do not miss this. They are not always responding to what they did. Sometimes they are responding to what your silence means. Your silence means you are no longer trapped in the same loop. Your silence means you are no longer reaching for closure from people who are committed to confusion. Your silence means you are finally learning that not every connection deserves endless access to your heart. Your silence means you are no longer willing to keep translating your value to people who only recognize it when they feel they are losing it. That realization can shake people. It shakes the ones who thought they had more time. It shakes the ones who thought you would always understand. It shakes the ones who assumed your care had no boundary. It shakes the ones who treated your loyalty like a permanent resource they never had to honor properly. It shakes the ones who were comfortable keeping you in a delayed position while they gave priority to everything else. It shakes the ones who believed you would remain emotionally reachable no matter how little they did to protect the connection. Now the energy is different, and they feel it. Chosen one, there is another reason your silence triggered them. Your silence was not empty. God met you inside it. What began as pain did not stay pain. What began as exhaustion did not stay exhaustion. What began as heartbreak did not stay heartbreak. Somewhere in the quiet, God began to transform your silence from wounded withdrawal into spiritual strength. He began to teach you how to observe instead of react. He began to teach you how to wait without collapsing. He began to teach you that peace is not passivity and boundaries are not cruelty. He began to teach you that you do not need to answer everything that pulls on your emotions. And once silence becomes strength, people can feel it. They can feel when your quiet is no longer begging. They can feel when your quiet is no longer confused. They can feel when your quiet is no longer waiting for them to become who they should have been already. They can feel when your quiet has become settled, protected, prayerful, and aligned. That is the version of your silence that makes people rush. Because a wounded silence can still be manipulated, but a healed silence is much harder to control. A wounded silence may still be waiting for the right words, but a healed silence has learned to watch patterns instead of chasing promises. A wounded silence may still hope that one emotional moment can fix everything, but a healed silence knows that transformation is not proven by urgency, it is proven by fruit, consistency, and truth over time. So when you ask why they are moving now, this is part of the answer. They can feel your silence becoming permanent. They can feel that this is no longer a temporary emotional pause. They can feel that something holy has happened in you, and that if they do not move now, they may lose access to the old version of you forever. Not because you are cruel, but because you are finally healing in a real way. Not because you hate them, but because you are finally learning that love without discernment is how many chosen ones stay trapped for too long. This is why you must stay alert. Because when people feel access closing, they often become more expressive than they have ever been before. They become clearer than they were when you needed clarity. They become more attentive than they were when you needed care. They become more emotionally available than they were when you were carrying the weight of the connection alone. And if you're not careful, that sudden energy can look like change when it is really just reaction. That is the warning in this hour. Do not be moved simply because they are finally moving. Do not assume that urgency equals sincerity. Do not let sudden effort erase a long pattern too quickly. Your silence exposed something for a reason. And if God allowed the exposure, it is because he wanted you to see clearly before making another emotional agreement that could pull you backward. What is being tested now is not only their intention. What is being tested now is your discernment. Will you break your silence just because they are uncomfortable? Or will you stay close to the wisdom God has been building in you? Will you let their sudden rush become your direction? Or will you remember that heaven often heals by slowing you down before it restores anything back to you? Chosen one, this is the part where many people get pulled backward, not because they stopped hearing God, but because they let someone else's sudden urgency speak louder than the wisdom God built during the silence. You need to understand that when people feel they are losing control, losing access, or losing the familiar version of you they relied on, they often become extremely persuasive. They suddenly know what to say. They suddenly know how to sound soft. They suddenly know how to speak in a way that touches the exact part of your heart that once kept the door open longer than it should have stayed open. That is why this season requires more than emotion. It requires discernment. Not every return is restoration. Not every apology is repentance. Not every emotional conversation is a sign that heaven is putting something back together. Sometimes it is simply a reaction to your detachment. Sometimes it is panic dressed as sincerity. Sometimes it is a last-minute attempt to stop a door from closing that they never respected when it was open. You have to be wise enough to tell the difference. Chosen one. One of the clearest signs that someone is rushing because they feel your silence, not because they have truly changed, is timing. Ask yourself why the urgency only appeared after your energy withdrew. Ask yourself why clarity arrived only after you stopped asking for it. Ask yourself why they suddenly sound emotionally present now that you are no longer making yourself easily available. If the truth only comes out when they sense they are losing access, that should tell you something. If concern only shows up when your peace becomes real, that should tell you something. If words become intense only after your boundaries become visible, that should tell you something. Timing exposes motive more than people realize. Another sign is pressure. Real change does not need to rush you. Real change does not demand immediate trust. Real change does not become irritated when you move slowly. Real change understands that healing has a pace, and trust has to be rebuilt with consistency, not emotion. But reaction often comes with pressure. It wants you to answer fast, decide fast, reconnect fast, forgive fast, reopen fast, and ignore what your spirit is warning you about, because the emotional atmosphere is suddenly heavy. Pressure is often the language of fear, control, and discomfort. Peace is the language of God, so pay attention to how their return makes your spirit feel. Does it bring peace, or does it bring confusion? Does it honor the process, or does it try to bypass it? Does it respect your silence, or does it try to make you feel guilty for needing it? Does it acknowledge the pattern honestly, or does it skip straight to emotion without responsibility? Does it create space for truth, or does it try to create urgency before truth can be examined properly? Chosen one, many people know how to sound sincere in a moment. Very few know how to remain honest over time. That is why you cannot judge by one conversation, one message, one apology, one emotional confession, or one intense moment. A moment can be powerful and still be temporary. A moment can be moving and still be misleading. A moment can sound mature and still be motivated by fear of losing access rather than genuine transformation of character. This is why pattern matters more than presentation. If they have a long history of delay, inconsistency, emotional absence, avoidance, half-truths, self-protective behavior, or making you carry more than your fair share of the connection, one sudden burst of urgency should not erase that too quickly. Discernment does not ignore the good, but it also does not become blind because the good finally appeared after a long season of lack. You have to ask whether this is fruit or performance. You have to ask whether this is humility or panic. You have to ask whether this is repentance or reaction. There is another sign you need to watch for: selective accountability. Some people return using emotional language, but they still avoid the full truth of what happened. They may say they miss you, but never fully acknowledge how they mishandled you. They may say they have been thinking about you, but never clearly name the pattern, the connection. They may say they want peace, but not justice. They may say they want to reconnect, but not rebuild the foundation properly. They want access restored without responsibility being faced. They want emotional relief without true correction. They want the comfort of your presence without the cost of real change. That is not restoration. That is interruption. Chosen one, restoration is not afraid of truth. Restoration does not need you to lower your standards in order to make it easier. Restoration does not shame your boundaries. Restoration does not demand immediate emotional availability. Restoration is patient enough to be tested. Restoration is humble enough to be observed. Restoration is honest enough to be slow. Restoration is mature enough to understand that if damage was done over time, trust may also need time to heal in a real and healthy way. Reaction, on the other hand, wants quick relief. It wants instant access. It wants emotional reassurance before there has been enough evidence to support it. It often sounds dramatic because it is trying to recover lost ground fast. It often sounds intense because it can feel the shift in you and does not know how to handle that loss of control. And if you are not careful, the intensity of that moment can make you feel like something deep is happening when, in reality, something exposed is just trying to re-enter before the door fully closes. That is why this warning is so important. Do not let intensity make decisions for you. Do not let nostalgia make decisions for you. Do not let guilt make decisions for you. Do not let history make decisions for you. And do not let loneliness make decisions for you. Chosen one, loneliness has caused many people to reopen doors that peace had already closed. The fear of losing connection has made many people call a test a blessing. The desire for closure has made many people trust words that were never backed by lasting fruit. But God has been teaching you something different in this season. He has been teaching you that your peace is precious. He has been teaching you that clarity matters. He has been teaching you that anything truly from Him will be able to survive examination, patience, boundaries, and truth. What is real does not collapse because you move wisely. What is real does not become offended because you refuse to rush. What is real does not need manipulation to stay alive. So if they are rushing, let them rush. If they are speaking, let them speak. If they are suddenly emotional, let them be emotional. But you remain still until God gives you peace. You remain observant until the pattern becomes clear. You remain grounded until emotion stops trying to lead the conversation. Because your assignment is not to rescue someone else's panic. Your assignment is to honor what God taught you in the silence. And what He taught you is this: just because someone finally sees your value does not mean they have earned renewed access to it. Seeing your value and stewarding your value are not the same thing. Missing your presence and being mature enough to handle your presence are not the same thing. Wanting you back and being ready to honor you properly are not the same thing. This is why discernment must stay awake now more than ever. Because this hour is not only revealing their motives, it is revealing whether you truly learned from the season that almost broke you. Chosen one, there is a reason heaven is telling you not to be impressed too quickly by this sudden shift in behavior. What often returns in a season of elevation does not always return because it belongs in your future. Sometimes it returns because it can feel you moving beyond its reach. Sometimes it returns because your silence has forced a confrontation that your constant presence once delayed. And sometimes it returns because what was once comfortable with your emotional availability becomes deeply unsettled when that availability is no longer guaranteed. This is where counterfeit restoration becomes dangerous. Counterfeit restoration does not always look dark or obvious. It often comes wrapped in the exact emotional language you once longed to hear. It can sound thoughtful. It can sound soft. It can sound vulnerable. It can sound spiritually aware. It can sound like maturity. It can sound like someone finally understands your value. And in some cases, there may even be real emotion in it. There may be real regret in it. There may be real fear in it. But regret is not the same thing as transformation. And fear of losing access is not the same thing as being ready to honor what was once mishandled. That is why you cannot judge this moment only by tone. Chosen one, many people know how to return with the right words, but not everyone knows how to return with the right spirit. There are people who can communicate sorrow without carrying true accountability. There are people who can sound broken without being changed. There are people who can sound deeply reflective, but when you slow the moment down and look closer, you realize they are still centered on what they feel, what they want, what they fear losing, and how your silence is affecting them. Real change is not merely emotional. Real change becomes visible in humility, patience, consistency, accountability, and willingness to rebuild correctly. Counterfeit restoration hates slow discernment, because slow discernment exposes motive. That is why one of the strongest warnings for you in this hour is this: do not let anybody rush your healing to accommodate their discomfort. If your silence is making them anxious, that anxiety is not your assignment to fix. If your boundaries are making them restless, that restlessness is not your cue to lower the standard. If your detachment is forcing them to face what they avoided, that confrontation may be necessary for them, but it does not mean you are required to immediately reopen the door. Some people do not want reconciliation. They want relief. Some people do not want truth. They want restored access. Some people do not want to rebuild the right way. They want to return quickly before your clarity becomes too strong to reverse. Some people do not miss you in a holy way. They miss the version of you that made their life emotionally easier, while your own spirit paid the cost. That is why this season requires you to watch what happens when immediate access is not granted. Watch whether their tone stays respectful when you remain guarded. Watch whether their words stay humble when you do not give instant reassurance. Watch whether their concern remains steady when you do not move as fast as they hoped. Watch whether their pursuit is rooted in truth, or whether it begins to fade once they realize they cannot instantly recover the emotional position they once had in your life. Pattern will reveal what presentation tries to hide. Chosen one. Counterfeit restoration often reveals itself by how it handles boundaries. If someone truly carries a changed spirit, they will respect your caution. They will understand your pace. They will not punish you for being careful. They will not call your wisdom pride. They will not label your healing as distance just because your healing no longer gives them easy access. They will understand that if the past created confusion, trust may need to be rebuilt slowly and honestly. But when something is counterfeit, boundaries become a problem. Suddenly you are accused of doing too much. Suddenly your caution is treated like rejection. Suddenly the focus shifts away from what happened and onto how your response is making them feel. Suddenly the emotional energy becomes heavier, not cleaner. Suddenly what looked soft begins to reveal impatience. What looked sincere begins to reveal entitlement. What looked honest begins to reveal that it was depending on you moving quickly in order to keep the momentum alive. That is not peace. That is pressure wearing a softer face. And pressure is one of the clearest signs that your spirit needs to slow down. Chosen one, remember this carefully. What is from God can survive being tested. It can survive time. It can survive honesty. It can survive boundaries. It can survive your need to pray. It can survive your need to observe. It can survive not being immediately embraced. Anything that falls apart because you chose wisdom may not have been as pure as it first appeared. Anything that becomes offended because you refused to abandon discernment may be revealing that it depended more on emotional momentum than on genuine transformation. That is why God is telling you not to be moved by urgency alone. Urgency can create a false sense of destiny. It can make you feel that if you do not respond now, something important will be lost forever. It can create panic in your emotions and make you question the very peace God fought to build in you. But what is truly meant for you in this season will not require you to betray your healing in order to keep it alive. God does not send restoration that demands self-abandonment. He does not open doors that require you to silence your discernment just to make someone else comfortable. If anything, what comes from Him will make room for your healing. It will make room for truth. It will make room for wise pacing. It will make room for evidence. It will make room for prayer. It will not force you to choose between compassion and clarity. It will not ask you to become blind again in order to become connected again. So let this settle in your spirit. Every return must be examined. Every apology must be weighed. Every emotional moment must be tested. Not because you are bitter, but because you are finally mature enough to know that not everything that comes back belongs. Not everything that reappears is covenant. Not everything that sounds tender is safe. Not everything that says your name carries God's permission to re-enter your life at the same level it once held. This is why your silence mattered so much. God used it to clear your vision. He used it to strip away the fog that emotion had created. He used it to show you that when words are removed, patterns become easier to read. He used it to teach you that being chosen by Him means you cannot afford to let every returning voice become an authorized influence in your life. And if they are truly changed, that truth will not need panic to prove itself. It will not need pressure to secure access. It will not need guilt to reopen your heart. It will have the patience to be seen clearly. It will have the humility to accept your caution. It will have the maturity to understand that what was damaged over time may need time to be evaluated honestly. So do not fall for the first wave. Do not surrender your peace because someone finally sounds serious. Do not confuse emotional intensity with spiritual confirmation. Let time speak. Let fruit speak. Let pattern speak. Let peace speak. And above all, let God speak before you decide what this return really means.